I know you have a very busy program. You have different mashayikh coming in, sheikhs and sheikhas coming in regularly. I know we have Sheikh Aisha Prime tonight, Sheikh Yasser Fahmi tomorrow. I looked at your program. So this is amazing. I just want to say up front that you guys have been doing this really phenomenal work. I'll get right into it in the interest of time. So I've been given a really wonderful topic, which is, it's called Heavenly Tales. And I've been asked to talk about Ashab al-Kahf, the people of the cave. And so just really, the way I'm going to do this, first of all, talk really briefly about the virtues of Surah Al-Kahf. I'm going to tell the story of the people of the cave. And then what we'll do is the remaining time that we have left, we're going to go through and we'll do a breakdown of the surah, inshallah. So the virtues of Surah Al-Kahf, really briefly, many of us know this, but it's always benefit to remind ourselves, is that this is a surah that was one of the early surahs. It's the Makki surah. There's ulama say that it was revealed in the first to second year after the dawah of the Prophet ﷺ. So it comes very early in the life of the Rasul ﷺ and his risalat and his prophethood. And it's a magnificent surah. It's 110 ayahs long. The Prophet ﷺ said, I'm just going to get right into it in the interest of time, is that the Prophet ﷺ told us ideally to recite this surah every Friday. The virtues of it are connected with Yawm al-Jum'ah, with the day of Friday, and there's a very specific reason why. The Prophet ﷺ told us that whoever recites Surah Al-Kahf regularly, makes a habit of it, it will be a protection from the Fitnah of Dajjal. From the Fitnah of Dajjal, and Dajjal, the Prophet ﷺ warned us, is the greatest, most vicious fitna that will ever face mankind. These are the words of Rasul ﷺ himself. And so he told the Sahaba, is that if it comes in my lifetime, while I am the Nabi with you, that I will defend you and fight against, will protect you and fight against Dajjal. But if it comes after my time, then you should be people that make the regular habit of reciting Surah Al-Kahf, because it will be a sense, it will provide nur to you and protect you from the dangers of Dajjal. That's another conversation for another time. I think Sheikh Yasser Fahmi or one of the other speakers is going to talk about Dajjal and Yajuj Majuj. So I'm not going to get into it except to frame it with that in the beginning. And here's the takeaway of the gist of the whole talk, is it actually comes from a real Quranic message, which is that the power of the surah and of the story of Ashab al-Kahf, the sleepers of the cave, is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will always protect us from fitna, from danger, from all of this fasad, if we connect our hearts to Him. He'll always connect the believers and those that are connected to Him. And the best way, one of the best ways to connect to Allah Ta'ala is the Qur'an. And so therefore, the benefit, I'll give you a practical takeaway right now. Surah Al-Kahf is 110 ayahs long. If you read slow like me, that can take up to an hour. And so you have to, make the time on a Friday to read it. And the beauty of our, deen is that Yawm al-Jum'ah really starts from Thursday Maghrib. So from Thursday Maghrib, our teachers tell us is that if you need to read it in sections, right? If you can't read all of it at once, break a little bit on Thursday night, then read the rest on Friday morning, etc. There's also a hadith that talks about the benefits of even the first 10 ayahs. If you read even the first 10 ayahs of Surah Al-Kahf, you will get the benefit of this protection. Now, Surah Al-Kahf has 4 stories in it. 4 very famous stories. The first, which we're going to focus on, is called the Sleepers of the Cave. And there's 4 fitnas that are associated with these stories. The first fitna is in the people of the cave. The Sleepers of the Cave is the fitna of religion. That if you believe in the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that you're going to be tested and tried. And that's what happens to them. And we're going to get more into detail of that in just a second. Number 2 is the story of the man with 2 gardens. And the fitna there is the fitna of wealth. That the man is blessed with wealth and his wealth makes him arrogant, and it's a test from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then we see whether he passes or doesn't pass the test. The third story is Musa and Khidr alayhi salam, right? It's a very well-known story. Musa alayhi salam travels with Khidr alayhi salam. They have a journey, they have a series of encounters, and there's a conversation that goes on between Sayyidina Musa alayhi salam and Sayyidina Khidr alayhi salam, and that is the fitna or the trial. When we use fitna here, it's the test of knowledge and of false knowledge, of thinking you know something, and then there's someone that knows more than you. And Musa alayhi salam is obviously one of the greatest nabis of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In fact, this is also a really beautiful point that not many of us know, or we have to be reminded of, is undoubtedly Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is the Habib of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But no other prophet is mentioned more in the Qur'an than Sayyidina Musa alayhi salam. He's mentioned over 130 times in the Qur'an. By far, there's no prophet that comes close in mention. And there's a secret in that. Why Allah Ta'ala loves the story of Musa alayhi salam and wants us to hear the story of Musa alayhi salam, connect with the story of Musa alayhi salam. It's this epic story of the good versus evil, about tyrannical authority versus those who connect themselves with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, etc., etc. And then the fourth story is the story of Zulqarnain. And Zulqarnain is said to be this legendary, very powerful ruler, and that's the fitna of power. When you gain power and you have dominion, what do you do with it? Do you use it for good, or because human beings, we have nafs, we have egos, and we are susceptible to misusing and abusing when we're given positions of power, privilege, authority, and things like that. And the story of Zulqarnain is how to manage this properly. So, this surah is really about fortifying our hearts with Imaan, to say that there's people that go through trials and tribulations and there's a way to come out. So here's the story. I'm going to read the ayahs in just a second, but I'm going to tell you the summary of the story so we're all on the same page, and then we'll go ayah by ayah. The story is this, and one important point of tafsir is that this story has certain details and it leaves out certain details. And the Mufassirun teach us that this is on purpose by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we know this. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is in His infinite knowledge and wisdom, makes incredibly deliberate choices on not only what details He gives us, on every word, every letter that He puts in the Qur'an Sharif, right? We believe this is part of our Aqeedah. And so therefore it's very powerful when Allah Ta'ala decides to put certain pieces of the story in, and when He decides to leave certain pieces of the story out. Part of that is also the logic of the Quranic story, of the qasas in the Qur'an, is that you can fill in the blanks with hadith, and Allah Ta'ala is telling us that certain things aren't important. You don't need to stress about certain details. Pay attention to the arc of the story. Right? When you study narrative, you study storytelling, there's always an arc that the way the story takes. That's what Allah Ta'ala wants us to draw into. Another point that I'll mention is that, ulama have said that up to approximately 1/3 of the Qur'an are just stories, which is also remarkable. Why? Because the human heart, the human mind is very attracted to stories. It connects with stories. Because with stories we have parables, we have lessons. And that's just the way Allah Ta'ala designs us. And it's the way Allah Ta'ala gave us this beautiful sacred history in the Qur'an, that He relates these stories again and again to fortify the believers. Now, the story is that it takes place sometime, our ulama say, between the time of Sayyidina Isa alayhi salam and the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And it said that there were a group of youth. Doesn't specify their age, but the Mufassirun said young people. We'd say college age people, maybe in their 20s, maybe a little younger, maybe a little older. They are in a society, which is also not named. They're in a society that has a tyrannical pagan king. And this idolater, this pagan king, is torturing them and persecuting them because of their belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so what they do is they decide that they can't stay because the persecution, the oppression is so great, that they're going to flee, and they find themselves in a cave. And when they go to this cave, we know the story is that they fall asleep. And they fall asleep, and the Qur'an tells us, this is one detail it does tell us, they fall asleep for 309 years. The ayah of the Qur'an is they fall asleep for 300 and plus 9. Now, just a fascinating point that when I was reading the tafsir of this is that if you look at 309 lunar years, right, in our lunar calendar, that basically comes out to 300 solar years. So let's just, for our purposes, I know the ayah says 309, I'm just going to say 300 when I refer to it. So they fall asleep for 300 years. And this is a miracle from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He makes this happen, and we're going to talk about why in a second. After 300 years, they awaken from their slumber. Allah Ta'ala wakes them up. And when they wake up, they're hungry, obviously. Allah Ta'ala has protected them. This is one of His miracles. He's protected them this whole time. And they venture out. And it's a beautiful conversation that they have, where what we presume is one of the older, maybe youth of the group there. He tells them two things. When you go out, look for halal food, pure food. Seek out pure food. And we're going to come back to this in a second. And when you go out, also be careful who you talk to. Why? And this is another point I'm going to bookmark now. The idea of discretion, of being very discreet when we go out. And then the end of the story, and then we'll get into reading the ayahs, is that they go out and they go to buy food with the money that they have. But the money is 300 years old. It's literally from centuries ago, from a different time, from a different era. The coinage has changed. Until finally they go and they're trying to buy food. And then one of the people that sees them trying to buy the food thinks that this is a treasure that they've uncovered. And he begins to ask him questions. And then lo and behold, the shopkeeper finds out that this is, these people are not from here, as they say, right? This is sort of an ajib, very strange circumstance. And then they follow them. The man follows them and they get discovered. And then, interestingly, the story ends after that. We presume that they die, that Allah Ta'ala makes them die a natural death after that. And then there's an interesting debate. Again, there's so many details in this. We can't go line by line through all of this. But I just want to give you the arc of the story. And then Allah Ta'ala says that they died. They pass away, and then there's certain lessons from that. Now, one other thing I want to mention is what are the asbab al-nuzul? What are the reasons of revelation with why Allah Ta'ala even puts this story in Surah Al-Kahf? It's this, that when the Prophet ﷺ was starting the da'wah in Makkah Mukarramah, obviously we know this, right? The Quraysh were incredibly upset. To put it mildly, it was seen as a quote-unquote disruptive force that he's bringing a deen different than the deen of their forefathers, which were, these are the people who are the descendants of Ibrahim alayhi salam, but unfortunately they've strayed from the path, right? They've gone into idolatry and into shirk. And so there's a group of the Quraysh that go to Yathrib. Who was living in Yathrib? Yathrib had a traditional community of the Jewish community, and there were some rabbis there. And so the Quraysh go and they asked some of the Jewish leaders in Yathrib that we have Muhammad ibn Abdullah, this man is coming and he's bringing this new deen. And we don't accept his nubuwah. We don't accept his prophethood. We need you to help us give him some questions to test the authenticity of his message. And so then the Jews give them, the Jewish people there they say, ask him these 3 questions. And then the Quraysh come back and they ask the Prophet these 3 questions. And I'm going to read you these questions, right? This is the occasions for revelation. They say what? Number 1, what is the story of the young people who fled seeking Allah's protection? Number 2, what is the story of the king given power of the east and the west? And number 3, tell us about the ruh. Tell us about the soul. And so there's another interesting point here, is that the Prophet ﷺ would regularly be visited by who? Sayyidina Jibreel alayhi salam. Sayyidina Jibreel alayhi salam would regularly visit the Prophet ﷺ and would bring him wahi. And so the Prophet ﷺ was anticipating that when Jibreel came next time, he would give him the answer to these questions. And the Prophet ﷺ didn't say the words, what? Does anyone know? He didn't say, Insha'Allah. And Allah Ta'ala comments on this. Because the Prophet ﷺ didn't say Insha'Allah, Allah Ta'ala, different mufassirin say it was in a few days up to 2 weeks that Jibreel alayhi salam did not come and did not bring word. And the Prophet began to get worried. Until finally, after the time had passed, Jibreel alayhi salam comes and then he brings Surah Al-Kahf. And that is another point to understand the context of this, is that when Jibreel alayhi salam comes, then he brings Surah Al-Kahf. Then Surah Al-Kahf is like an amazing, all of the Quran Sharif is amazing. Don't get me wrong. But this surah in particular has the 4 stories that I mentioned. 2 of the questions that they asked about what? Who are the youth that fled and sought Allah's protection? That's the first story, the Ashab al-Kahf. And the last story in the surah is about Zulqarnain, the man, the king that was given power between east and west. And those are answered in the surah. And the last part, what is the ruh? Allah Ta'ala answers that elsewhere in the Quran Sharif and says that when they ask you about the ruh, I'm paraphrasing here the ayah, when they ask you about the ruh, tell them that they know but little of it. That it's a very powerful, mysterious thing that the human mind cannot comprehend and understand the real quwwah, the real power of the ruh that Allah Ta'ala gave us. But we believe in it, and the Quran instructs us in it, etc., etc. Now, give me 1 second. I'm just going to start I'm going to read the ayahs of this, and then we're going to read the first 29 ayahs. I'll read them in English, and then we'll give a little commentary. So, just in the interest of time, I'll read the English instead of going through the Arabic. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Allah Ta'ala begins by praising Himself. He says, all praises for Allah who revealed the book to His servant, allowing no crookedness in it, making it perfectly upright, to warn the disbelievers of a severe torment from Him, to give good news to the believers who do good, that they will have a fine reward. This is, remember what I said at the beginning, one of the reoccurring themes of the Quran is that if you turn to Allah with sincerity, and you have belief in Allah, and you do amal as-salih, and you make an effort sincerely to do good deeds, Allah Ta'ala will never let you down. It's inconceivable that Allah Ta'ala would ever let the believers down, would never let them despair. Is that you will always be rewarded for anything and everything that you do, fi sabilillah, for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Moving on. They will have a reward, a fine reward in which they will remain forever. And warn those who claim that Allah has offspring. They have no knowledge of this, nor do their forefathers. What a terrible claim comes out of their mouths. They say nothing but lies. This is addressing the questions, right? The attitude that the Quraysh are bringing, right, to the Prophet ﷺ to challenge him. Now perhaps you, O Prophet, will grieve yourself to death over their denial if they continue to disbelieve in this message. One point in the tafsir there is that we know this, but Allah Ta'ala is reinforcing the heart of the Prophet ﷺ to say what? Hidayah is in the hands of Allah. He is Al-Hadi. Only Allah Ta'ala can guide people. The Prophet ﷺ cared so much about 2 things. He cared so much about the responsibility that he had as a Nabi and as the Rasul. He took that responsibility and burden incredibly seriously, that Allah Ta'ala had tasked him with the greatest responsibility, and he didn't want to, as we would say, let Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala down by failing to fulfill the responsibility. Not that we would ever imagine that he would, but this is how much he cared about his relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that he wanted to fulfill the responsibility Allah Ta'ala had given him. That's the first part. The second part is he cared so much about his people. He was a Qurayshi. These are his people. He would weep over them. And all the efforts that he was making day in and day out trying to call the people. There's many other hadith. We just don't have time to get into it right now, unfortunately. Many other hadith where the Prophet said it's like he's running after people, pulling them. They're running towards a cliff. What is over the side of the cliff is the fire. He's running after them, grabbing them, pulling them back. Don't go that way. This is nothing but your own destruction. Come and listen to the haqq. Come to listen to the beauty of the haqq of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That is why, right? Allah Ta'ala says elsewhere in the Qur'an, I've sent a Nabi from among you, and your circumstances greatly distress him. He cares deeply, right? About what you're going through, about what the mu'mineen were going through. Oh, just in the interest of time, moving on. So what I wanted to say is the Prophet ﷺ cared about the message, not just the Qurayshis for that matter. I say this was like his home, right? We know this from the Qur'an, that Allah Ta'ala raised every Nabi from amongst the people, from amongst themselves. Because human nature is what? Is that when people that you have a low barrier of difference with, they're from your cultural context or milieu. They speak your language. They look like you. They know your customs. Human nature is what? Is that there's more congruence, is what they call it in psychology. That there's less dissonance there. And once there's congruence, it means what? The barriers to reception are lower. So it's easier to accept the message or advice from someone that you already have some level of familiarity and built-in trust with. So that's why every prophet was sent to a qawm and every Nabi went to their qawm. But the Rasuls had a very different responsibility. The job of a Rasul, of a messenger, is greater than the job of a Nabi, in the sense that they're sent for a broader community. And in this sense, the Prophet ﷺ is sent for whom? All of humanity. Right? The Risala, the message that he brought, is for all of the world. And so we are the beneficiaries and blessed by Allah to be from the ummah of Rasulullah. And it's something, by the way, we should never, ever, ever take for granted. That one of the greatest ni'mas on us, first is Imaan, right? And Imaan, and inclusion in what? In the ummah of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. So just so when the Prophet sallallahu, Allah Ta'ala is talking to him, right? Saying, now perhaps you, Prophet, will grieve yourself to death over their denial if they continue to disbelieve in this message. We have indeed made whatever is on earth as an adornment for it in order to test of them, which of them is best in deeds. And this is where the story starts. And we will certainly reduce whatever it is to a barren ground. That ayah right there, by the way, when you read the tafsir, is what? One of the things that Dajjal, when Dajjal will come, is what? Dajjal, like we said, with new people have joined us, Dajjal is the greatest fitnah. In the words of the Prophet ﷺ, the greatest fitnah to ever face this humanity will be the Dajjal. And one of the unique powers that Allah Ta'ala will give Dajjal is from Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala. Dajjal will he'll go and he'll command the rain. And he'll say to the people, you don't believe in my power? Look at my power. I command the elements. When I tell it to rain, it rains. And you have vegetation and you have your crops. And when I tell it to stop raining, it stops raining. Right? And then therefore you have to acknowledge, this is Dajjal comes from Dajjala in Arabic, which means to deceive, to cover. And that's going to be the primary characteristic of Dajjal, is he's going to be the great liar, the great deceiver. And many, many people, unfortunately, are going to be misled by Dajjal's deception. And so this is something that we have to always be on the lookout for. So in that ayah when Allah Ta'ala says, and we will certainly reduce whatever is on it, meaning the earth to barren ground, Allah Ta'ala is, we would say, asserting His quwwah, His power. It says in the tafsir that don't be afraid of what Dajjal tells you. I am in control of all of these things. Now, this begins ayah number 9. Have you, O Prophet, thought that the people of the cave and the plaque, the rakim it's called, were only wonders of our signs? Allah Ta'ala is telling the Prophet this to tell to the people. Remember when those youths took refuge in the cave and said, our Lord, grant us mercy from yourselves and guide us rightly through the ordeal. Now, just in the interest of time, I have a whole page of notes here. And I've been doing a lot of context, but I'm going to get to the heart of the matter. One of the biggest takeaways is this, is that when you sincerely approach Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when you sincerely approach Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and you ask for hidayah, you have to believe and know and have yaqeen in your heart that Allah ta'ala will take care of you. Allah Ta'ala reinforces this message again and again and again in this story. And another point here is that with the stories of the sleepers of the cave, they decided amongst themselves that the fitna and the oppression was so bad from that pagan ruler that they couldn't stay. Like they couldn't, their own physical safety, their spiritual safety, their emotional safety, as we would say, was at risk. And that's why they decided to separate themselves. So there's a dunyawi physical action, and then there's a ruhani, a spiritual action as well. So they decide to separate themselves, and as they make the decision, they also then call upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the scholars tell us that this is a combination we have to always understand. At any difficult point in your life, or for any point in your life in that matter, right? This is the idea of istikhara. Istikhara has two components to it. Istikhara means to ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for khair, right? It's a form 10 verb in Arabic. Is to ask Allah Ta'ala for what? For khair. There's istikhara and there's mashwara. We do both things to do it properly. You consult with people who are worthy of consultation. You get advice from people that are intelligent, that are competent, that care about you, that have your interests in mind, and you ask them for their sincere advice. That's the physical action. And then the spiritual action, the ruhani action is you make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And when you do that, this is the sunnah that Allah ta'ala prefers, that you do both of these things. Now, one other point that I want to mention right now is, and I forgot to mention in the beginning, this comes in what? The beginning of the nubuwwah of the Prophet ﷺ in Makkah Mukarramah. What was happening in Makkah at that time? We all know these stories because we all teach these stories to our children. This was the torture of Sayyidina Bilal radiallahu anhu. This is the torture of Sayyidina Sumayya radiallahu anha. This is the torture of Ammar and Ammar bin Yasir. This is the torture of the early companions that the Prophet ﷺ is seeing, and his early community and his family are seeing with their own eyes. Unbelievable dhulm and oppression that's taking place in front of their eyes, right? From the Qurayshis, from Ubay ibn Khalf, from Abu Lahab, from Abu Jahl and things like that. Those were the darkest days. We call the crucible of Makkah, right? The faith of the people was getting tested, and the faith of the people was not only getting tested, the faith of some people was on the border of getting shaken, right? In that. And it's in that first to second year that Allah Ta'ala sends this story and sends a story of a people that came before you. You think your faith is getting tested? Look at what happened to people that came before them. They were getting tortured and killed. So much so that they had to break away from society. But rest assured, if you put your trust in Allah, Allah Ta'ala will always be there for you. Human beings will disappoint you. Human beings will let you down. But Rabbul Alameen subhanahu wa ta'ala will never let you down. Will never disappoint you. Now, I mean, this is, mashallah, I'm so appreciative of the invitation from the brothers, Sidi Fawzan and the brothers and sisters that put this together. I've said that, I want to make another point. When I was preparing for this and reading tafsir, wallahi, I didn't talk about it in the khutbah today because the khutbah is a different type of venue. And even now we only have so much time. You know just as well as I do what the ummah of the Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam is going through right now. What the ummah in Sudan is going through right now. What the ummah, the Uyghurs and the Rohingya are going through right now. The fitna and fasad in Yemen. What's going on, the famine in Somalia, the ongoing trauma for decades in Afghanistan, in Iraq, 10 plus years of the trauma of the Syrian civil war. And then the worst, as in worst because in my lifetime, like I grew up, we lived through the Bosnian genocide, right? We were in, Sidi Abdurrahman and I, who grew up here in Toronto in this community, we were in high school together in those times. We heard stories, right, of the Bosnian genocide. But now we're living in an ajib, strange world where there is no denying the fact. It is being live streamed 24/7. Mass death, genocide, unabashed, naked, raw, demonic, degenerate violence and oppression. And so what I'm saying is that maybe my heart needs to read Surah Al-Kahf more on a day like today to understand when, before there's stories of the past, stories of the old, and then there's what your eyes and ears cannot deny what is going on. And so maybe it's a balm for my heart, right? Because my heart needs it. That how many women screaming, families and children and mothers and sisters. These are our, sisters and brothers in Islam going through these turmoil every day. And so to me, maybe the kismat, as I was going to say, the destiny is that I was given this responsibility to talk about this today. What's on my heart is to read the news, be aware. You have to be aware and in touch with what's going on, but always come back and connect to the Book of Allah. Because, and I don't say this as a slogan, I say it as haqiqat, as truth. The answers, right, to our needs are in the Book of Allah. Allah Ta'ala says, come to me sincerely and you will not be disappointed. My challenge is I'm not going. Maybe my heart is wavering. I'm going to be honest. Maybe my heart is like, I don't know, it's so bad out there. What is it that can possibly help us through this? And that's the one last point. I'll go on. That's the point I alluded to in the Qur'an, in the khutbah, is that look, my job is to preach and teach for a living. It's easy to talk about tawakkul. It's easy to talk about reliance and trust in Allah. It's very difficult to get your heart in a space that you really have yaqeen that, Ya Allah, I'm doing what I can do, right? Maybe I can do nothing more than just share these messages, with people that care, because I don't have the capacity to move the needle and to impact any sort of substantive change. But we're making dua to Allah. We're crying in the nights of, in our qiyam, in our siyam, and all of these types of things. We're turning back. This is the month of the Qur'an. This is a month of reviving the story. And to honor the request, I'm going to continue with this. So the Prophet, Allah Ta'ala says, and remember when those youths took refuge in the cave, our Lord, grant us mercy from yourself and guide us rightly through our ordeal. So we caused them to fall into a dead sleep in the cave for many years. Then we raised them so we may show them which of the two groups would make a better estimation of the length of their stay. We relate to you, O Prophet, their story in truth. They were youths who truly believed in their Lord, and we increased them in guidance. And the footnote point there is if you work on your Imaan, if you strengthen your Imaan, and by extension strengthen your taqwa and your relationship, ta'alluq ma Allah, your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah ta'ala by His own words He is al-Hadi. He will give you more hidayat. He will give you huda and guidance in the right path. And we straightened their heart when they stood and declared, our Lord is the Lord of the heavens and earth. We will never call upon any God besides Him, or we would truly be uttering an outrageous lie. They said to one another, these people of ours have taken gods besides Him. Why do they not produce a clear proof of them? Who then does more wrong than one who fabricates lies about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? An interesting side point there is that they were young people, but intuitively their hearts understood. There's a logic of the mind, and then there's a logic of the heart as well. And they were operating on both levels. But the logic of the qalb, the logic of the heart, the understanding, the fahm, the understanding of the heart is more powerful than the understanding of the aql. Aql is very powerful and important, but we say the actual organ of cognition and perception in this deen is the heart, which is, Allah Ta'ala mentions the aql as very powerful and very important. Jazakumullah khair. Very powerful and very important. But Allah Ta'ala says even more times in His book, rectify your heart. Take care of your heart. Purify your heart. Watch your heart. Don't let your heart get toxified. Don't let your heart get filled with poison. Don't let your heart waver. Like the heart wavers naturally. It wobbles. That wobble is natural as well. Because to deny that is to deny our humanity. But to understand after the wobble, what gives you istiqamah? What gives you a sense of certitude? What gives you a sense of balance and steadfastness? It's about tending to the heart, purifying the heart, taking care of the heart, making sure that it's connected to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Since you have distanced yourselves from them and that what they worship besides Allah, take refuge in the cave. Your Lord will exalt His mercy to you and accommodate you in this ordeal. And you would have seen the sun as it rose, inclining away from the cave to the right, and as it set, declining away from them to the left, while they lay in its open space. That is one of the signs of Allah. Whoever Allah guides is truly guided, but whoever He leaves astray, you will never find for them a guiding mentor. Part of this is Allah Ta'ala, out of His infinite mercy, the way that He positioned their bodies in the cave is that they were getting sustenance, but they weren't affected by the elements. Allah Ta'ala chose this as a sign that they would live for 300 years, right, in the safe place. And you would have thought that they were awake, though they were asleep. We turned them over to the right and to the left while their dog stretched his forelegs at the entrance. Had you looked at them, you would have certainly fled away from them filled with terror. And so we awakened them so they might question one another. And one of them explained, how long have you remained asleep? And some replied, perhaps a day or a part of a day. And they said to one another, your Lord knows best how long you have remained. So send one of those with silver coins of yours to the city and let him find which food is the purest and then bring you provisions from it. Let them be exceptionally cautious and do not let them give you away. I want to respect the time, and I know that I think they make a dua, which is beautiful, before the time of iftar. The last 30 seconds I want to, inshallah, for those that can stay for the evening program, we'll continue with this evening program as well. What I want to say is this, is just to repeat, is just like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protected the sleepers of the cave, Allah Ta'ala will protect all of us when we reattach and reconnect with the Qur'an Sharif. And this is the month of doing that. We have to believe it. That's why Allah Ta'ala tells us these stories again and again. And also the virtue of good companionship, of good suhbah, is that the Prophet ﷺ, or Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala selected these people. According to some scholars, they didn't know each other before, but they were on a single mission together to connect to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is the power of good suhbah. May Allah ta'ala increase the good suhbah in this community. May Allah ta'ala increase the connection that this community has to the Qur'an. And may Allah ta'ala increase the benefit that this community brings to the people outside of its walls. Ameen ya Rabbal Alameen bi rahmatika ya arhamar rahimin. Jazakumullah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.